Welcome to the Presidential Pro-Life Teletown Hall, presented by Personhood USA. And now your host, Steve Ditz.
Welcome back to the program. We have one more candidate to speak to tonight, and we'll introduce him here in just a moment. I want to thank Personhood USA for sponsoring tonight's event. Please support them with prayer and financial support as they try to fight for what is the basic articulation of the inalienable right to life right out of our Declaration of Independence. Join the movement. Visit Personhood USA, all one word, personhoodusa.com. Keith Mason is here with us from Personhood USA. And, Keith, we're getting ready to introduce our final candidate. For folks that are just tuning in tonight, what have they missed so far?
Well, they've missed Governor Rick Perry and Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann and Senator Santorum just expounding on their convictions on life and explaining why they signed the Personhood USA pledge, saying that all humans should be considered persons, regardless of their age or size. And I've been really encouraged by what we've heard so far, and really encouraged at the opportunity that a lot of your listeners in Iowa have on January 3rd, and I know they can go to championthevoteiowa.com to get out and vote, and I think it's so important for Christians to do that. So as we get ready for Speaker Gingrich, I just want to remind everyone that the information that they hear tonight is worthless if they don't actually put it to use and get out there and vote their conviction.
Well, let's next welcome the candidate that was really the first that I heard on the presidential campaign trail to articulate the concept of personhood, and that's former House Speaker Newt Gingrich joins us. Newt, are you there?
I am. I'm delighted to have this opportunity, Steve, to be with you and to talk about what is actually, at the very center of our entire existence as a country. I mean, what does it mean when the Declaration of Independence says that these are truths that we hold, that we believe are self-evident? What does it mean when we say that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And that immediately raises the question of who is the we that is endowed, and when does that endowment begin? And I think this is as important a discussion as anything we'll have in defining our very fabric as a society that cares deeply about the morality of life.
Mr. Speaker, I want to ask you a question I've asked all the candidates tonight. According to the pledge that all of you signed, you have agreed to, quote, endorse legislation to make clear that the 14th Amendment protections apply to unborn children, unquote. I want to know, under a Gingrich administration, what would that legislation look like, first of all? And secondly, what happens if the U.S. Supreme Court attempts to strike down this legislation and replace it with one of its own edicts denying the inalienable right to life? Would you enforce the inalienable right to life or the court's opinion as the law?
Well, as you know, Professor Robbie George of Princeton was the person who first began developing this, and he and I engaged in a discussion in it at a forum that Senator DeMint and Congressman Steve King co-hosted in South Carolina several months ago, and is based on the fact that in the Constitution, in the 14th Amendment, it says very specifically Congress shall define what is a person? What does it mean? And they were doing it, of course, because there were no records for the slaves. And so when you free the slaves, they have no historic record of who they are. They have no citizenship per se because they've been slaves. And the Congress is wrestling with this question of how do we define who a person is? What is a person? Robbie George points out, and I believe he's correct, that this 14th Amendment almost certainly could be used by the Congress to define personhood as beginning at conception. Now, I think one way to solve this would be to write the bill so that it is not appealable. In 1802, when the Jeffersonians, when Thomas Jefferson and James Madison wrote the Judicial Reform Act of 1802, which abolishes 18 out of 35 federal judges, they wrote in a prohibition on the Supreme Court even reviewing it for 2 years. And the Supreme Court followed that prohibition because they were afraid that the Jeffersonians would frankly abolish them if they didn't. So I think you could write an exclusionary position that would start the process. But I also think there are other tools. If you go to newt.org, you will see a paper on rebalancing the judiciary that Vince Haley drafted as my research director. And it's about 54 pages long, and it puts in historic context the ability of the President and the Congress to rebalance the judiciary when it acts arbitrarily or when it acts outside the American Constitution. And this all began for me back when the Ninth Circuit Court said that one nation under God was unconstitutional in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I decided that was so outside of American history and so outside of the American tradition that we had to find a way to rebalance the courts. And so I've spent a lot of time over the last 9 years developing that. But I think we can, in fact, adopt a law like that. I would certainly propose it as president. And I think Robbie George is certainly as fine a scholar as there is in the country, and he could make a tremendous case for why it's totally appropriate.
Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich is on the line here, our final candidate on our Teletown Hall, our pro-life Teletown Hall, brought to you by Personhood USA. Visit their website, personhoodusa.com, to join the movement. You can contribute both financially and also with prayer. Also want to give another big shout-out tonight to our new listeners on the Bot Radio Network that are airing this across the country on 88 radio stations reaching the heart of America. During the break, if you are on hold in the town hall, you will have an opportunity to have Keith Mason at least ask one, if not a couple of your questions for the former House Speaker here, just as we did for Rick Perry, Michelle Bachmann, and also Rick Santorum, who joined us before Newt Gingrich did. And again, the website there that Newt just mentioned is newt.org, and that has more of the information that you just heard from the former speaker that he was discussing. We'll come back more here in a moment. Stay tuned. Keith Mason, we're clear. Go ahead. Your question for the speaker.
Hi, Speaker Gingrich. I just appreciate the time you're spending here, and certainly your signature on the Personhood Pledge. And I do have a couple questions to ask you from some in the audience. One of the questions here is from Matt Staver. He's the founder of Liberty Counsel, and his question is, President Obama has used federal funding to force foreign countries to liberalize their abortion laws. What specific steps would you take as president to undo what Obama has done in order to ensure that a pro-life ethic permeates your presidency with regards to international relations?
Well, first of all, on the very first day, I will sign an executive order reinstating Ronald Reagan's Mexico City policy that no U.S. money will be used overseas for abortions, period. I will also move to defund Planned Parenthood, which is the largest single abortion provider in the U.S. and a major force for abortion around the world. And I would transfer the money from Planned Parenthood to adoption services so young women have a chance to choose life rather than a culture of death. I would also overhaul the U.S. Foreign Service to get rid of the people who are aggressively pro-abortion and aggressively trying to pressure other governments into adopting pro-abortion positions. And I would actively work with those countries around the world that have a position of opposing abortion and are in favor of the right to life, trying to find a common front on creating a moral framework within which the rule of law can occur.
Thank you. And I also have a question from one of our listeners. I know this is being broadcast nationally, so even into Atlanta, Georgia. And this question comes from Dan Becker. He's the president of Georgia Right to Life. And he first says he's so grateful for your signature on the pledge, just as I am. And he says, as you know, the pledge states that we should not allow the intentional taking of innocent human life. This means that you'd be willing to fight for the right to life of children who are conceived in rape and incest. How did you arrive at this position, and how will you defend it against the attacks of the abortion proponents?
Well, first of all, that is the position of if you believe the life begins at conception, then the question becomes, and we had this discussion in 1984 when I was on the platform committee with Henry Hyde, and the Hyde Amendment had always included rape and incest exceptions because that was the only way you could get a majority to pass it. And there is a doctrine that says that if you have to choose an imperfect tool in order to save the maximum number of lives, that it's morally acceptable, even if it's tragic. But Hyde convinced us in the platform committee that year that we should adopt a position that all life is sacred, and therefore you should find ways to provide other kinds of compensation, other kinds of approaches to enable people in those situations to have their child and to do so without damaging them.
Brought to you by Personhood USA. I want to thank them for sponsoring tonight's event. Join the movement. Go online to personhoodusa.com. You've heard us talking about this pledge that the presidential candidate signed. You can read this pledge at personhoodusa.com. And also, we've got folks that are still listening to this teletown hall as it concludes the portion off the air with former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. This issue is of vital importance, and we'll have more analysis of this issue coming up in the second hour of the radio program. So if you stay tuned in, I'll give you, and our team here at the Steve Dace radio program, give you our thoughts on the answers you heard from the candidates, both on and off the air. And I think we're joined again by Keith Mason from Personhood USA. Keith, are you with us?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Keith, give us your final thoughts on what we heard from the candidates here tonight, and whether you think they did an effective job of communicating where they're at on the sanctity of human life, all human life.
Yeah, I think to each of their abilities they have, I think we could sense definitely some conviction in some versus others, and I'm grateful again for the opportunity with them and with all those that are joining us on the teletown hall, that's simulcasting this event as well. But yeah, I believe they did the best they can, and I think now it's up to the Christians that are out there to go vote and to make their decision and vote for the candidate they thought was best.
I want to just first of all, I want to give you guys what we call on our show here a helmet sticker, because what's happened here is the way the system is supposed to work. I mean, you guys raised a banner, you raised the standard, and said, "Hey, this is what God and our founding documents command. All life, regardless of the way it was conceived, is sacred, and the government is only allowed by God to do its duty of protecting that life." And you guys raised that standard, and you have compelled these candidates to raise their standard, or those who accepted your standard, to improve the way that they articulated it and challenge them to apply it. And one example is a conversation we heard tonight from from Texas Governor Rick Perry, where he cited a conversation he had with a pro-life activist who really changed his heart on the idea that, we didn't have to protect children that were conceived in rape and incest. And he was pretty open and he was pretty transparent about that. And really, I think, brother, that is the way this process is supposed to work. Instead of going around, and begging these people to listen to us, we are the people in charge. They are our employees. And I think if we demand more from them, particularly if they have the right moral convictions, they will rise to the occasion. But ultimately, we get the government we deserve. So if folks want more, they should demand more.
That's right. And, I think, the rubber meets the road in Iowa. And January 3rd is when we're going to be able to really make a statement to the nation. And that only happens when Christians go out and caucus. And, I know they can do that by visiting championthevoteiowa.com. They can see, they can find their caucus if they're not registered to vote and they're listening to us right now. And they have convictions of being pro-life and protect the children. Then they need to go out and caucus. They need to go vote. And then if they're planning on doing that, the other thing they could do is call other Christians and encourage them to go vote. And they could do all that at championthevoteiowa.com. And so to me, I think that's where it matters most. And across the nation, I think that's all of our duty as Christians, to get out and vote. And if we're not registered to vote, to get registered to vote this year, because this coming November is so important.
Keith, thank you very much. Thanks to the entire team there and everybody to help put this on tonight. And what you guys are trying to do, which is to bring this fight right back to where it should have been from the day after Roe versus Wade came down from the court, and that is, what does God say? What does our founding documents say? And that ought to be the standard. And thank you and your organization for upholding it, and we'll do everything we can on this radio program to help you do so for as long as you do. God bless, and thank you very much.